Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, SD WAN Security Architectures, brought to you by Network Computing and VeloCloud, and broadcast by UBM. I'm Curtis Franklin, and I'll be your moderator. We have just a few announcements before we begin. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the folder icon located at the bottom of your screen. You can participate in the Q&A session at the end of the presentation by asking questions at any time during this webinar. Just type your question into the Q&A window to the right of the presentation window and then click the Submit button. At the end of the webinar, we'll ask you to complete our feedback form. Your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. You can also launch the survey at any time by clicking on the red survey button at the bottom of the console. At this time, we recommend you disable any pop-up blockers you may have. Finally, if you experience any technical problems, please type your issue into the Q&A text area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. And now, on to our presentation, SD WAN Security Architectures. Discussing today's topic will be Zeus Kerravala, founder and principal analyst at ZK Research. Zeus is the founder and principal analyst with ZK Research. Kerravala provides a mix of tactical advice to help his clients in the current business climate and long-term strategic advice. Kerravala provides research and advice to the following constituents: end-user IT and network managers, vendors of IT hardware, software and services, and the potential investors. As a note, Zeus will also be joined by a special guest speaker, Parag Thakur, who is Director of Product Management with VeloCloud Networks. With that, Zeus, we're going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Curtis. I appreciate the introduction. And I want to thank everybody for taking some time out of your hectic and busy lives to join us on this webinar. I think it's a great topic. Obviously, the topic of SD-WAN has been around now a few years. There's a number of different ways of deploying SD-WAN, a number of different architectures, and I think it's important that as you go through this deployment, you understand what those different options are so you can make the right decision for your organization. I find the topic itself fascinating. Just to give a quick little bio on myself, I've been an industry analyst now about 16 years, 10 years at Yankee Group, and now the last 6 on my own. But before that, I was actually I held a number of IT positions. I was a CIO for a while. I worked for a VAR for a short period of time as well. And I find it fascinating that back in the late 90s, we actually talked a lot about moving away from the legacy hub-and-spoke network, and the WAN architecture wasn't really all that efficient. I tried doing internet VPN back then, and it didn't work all that well, and nothing happened for the better part of 20 years. And now finally we're at a point where I think the technology, the demand, and has finally caught up to where we can actually implement this change now. So it's a great topic. I hope you learn something and take something away from this, and you're able to move on with your SD-WAN deployments after this webinar. Now, I want to first talk a little bit about what's going on in the business climate that's driving the need for SD-WAN. And these are a couple of quotes from a couple of smart guys. On the left is Mark Benioff from Salesforce. On the right, Dan Schulman from PayPal. And these were quotes actually from the World Economic Forum. I'm a big fan of that event. It happened earlier this year, I think in January, in Davos, Switzerland. And one of the big themes at the event was this concept called digital transformation or digitization. And in a digital world, speed, as Benioff said, speed is the new currency of business. And that's causing companies to think differently about the way they operate. And of course, there's a bunch of native digital organizations like Uber and Airbnb and Square and companies like that that have completely disrupted the markets they play in. And they've disrupted them quickly, right? You think about the impact that many, many years ago that Walmart had in the retail space it took roughly about 30 years for their impact to be felt. Today, industry has been disrupted in the better part of 4 or 5 years by companies like Uber. And so that's causing companies to think differently. And as Dan Schulman stated, the biggest impediment to a company's future success is its past success. Now, what does this mean to you, the network manager, the IT manager, the CIO? I think you need to think differently about your IT organization, the way ITs run, to compete in the digital era. Legacy IT processes are filled with manual tasks, particularly in the network. When I was an engineer, I spent many hours configuring routers and switches and doing them one by one and cutting and pasting scripts in and things like that. And while it wasn't the most elegant way, it worked in an environment where the rate of business change was relatively slow. But today we live in a world where, as Mark Benioff said, speed is the new currency of business. That means that the IT foundation, the IT technology that powers the organization must be agile, but you're only as agile as your least agile component, and that today is the network, right? We've gone through tremendous evolution in the areas of server virtualization, flash-based storage, and technologies like that to make our data centers more efficient, but ultimately we really haven't evolved the network, and that's what's given rise to this concept called SD WAN. Now, one of the big enablers of digital transformation, and which has been driving SD WAN, is the cloud. It's hard to go anywhere without seeing something about the cloud. It's on, if you travel a lot, you see billboards in airports. You see it driving down the highway. You see commercials on TV. In fact, the last Rocky movie, Rocky was talking to Apollo Creed's kid, and they were talking about putting some data in the cloud and things like that. So the cloud is literally everywhere, and it's changed the way companies have worked. In fact, it's moved a lot of decision-making away from IT to the lines of business. And in fact, if you talk to any of the cloud broker companies, they'll tell you that most organizations have far more cloud in it than they realize. In fact, I did some work with a couple of the companies last year, and some of the customers I talked to thought they had 30, 40 cloud apps when in fact they had several hundred, right? Now, this is one of the reasons why cloud services will grow at an 18% CAGR from 2012 to 2019, and that is 6x the CAGR that overall IT spend will be. 1 out of every 4 dollars spent on apps will be cloud, and that number is growing every year. 80% of the Global 2000 at least has 10% of IT now running in the cloud. That'll be 30% within just a few years, and the cloud significantly changes network traffic patterns, and that's why it's so meaningful to the WAN. Historically, all of our traffic came in through a single ingress-egress point, and it wasn't all that efficient. But again, the internet traffic that we had was best effort in nature. It's hard to say really anything we did via the internet was mission critical at one time. But today, of course, all our accounting information, our customer information, really everything we do lives in the cloud, and so it has become mission critical. And finding a better way of delivering cloud to workers, whether they're in the headquarters or the WAN or the branch, is extremely important. That's why so much emphasis on SD-WAN today. Now, along with this, security remains a top network challenge for IT managers as well. In fact, this was a bit of survey data from my latest network purchase intention study, and it shows that improving network security is by far the #1 task for network managers. And we're moving into a world where everything's connected. We're trying to improve network agility. We are trying to bring in software-defined technologies. And if you think about the impact of all those things, IoT, cloud, mobility put together, it's made securing the organization much more complicated, right? So back in the day, right, before we started adopting cloud apps like crazy and bringing in consumer devices and connecting IoT devices, every bit of IT was controlled by IT, it was purchased by IT, and it was managed by IT. And so IT had complete control of the infrastructure up and down the stack, and they were able to secure it. Today, of course, it's very difficult to have that kind of control, right? There's many entry points. In fact, if you think about security today, it's what I call has an asymmetric problem where where every time we introduce a new Wi-Fi access point, a new consumer device, an IoT endpoint, a cloud service, we're increasing the number of ways a hacker can breach your organization. And that's growing exponentially. But the bad guys only have to find one way in. So there's asymmetry that we have between possible breach points and hackers getting in continues to grow, but our security budgets haven't. And so that's why it is such a challenge today to secure organizations. 89% of security breaches are now driven by financial or espionage. Lots and lots of internal attacks. In fact, if you've been following the media, one of the most well-known ones that happened over the last few years was Ashley Madison, and that was a complete internal breach. The entire user database was stolen from an internal employee, and so it's changing. Traditional perimeter security is still important, but it only addresses part of the problem. And so cloud, as I mentioned, cloud IT, mobile, these things, they create more risks for organizations. So you need to rethink your security strategy as long as your WAN strategy. And these are just some interesting factoids from my research that shows the complexity of where we are today. 32 is the average number of vendors, security vendors, in an enterprise. 32 is a lot. And I've never talked to a chief security officer that's now told me that when they get to 33 or 34, they feel they'll be secure. In fact, sometimes more vendors doesn't necessarily make you more secure. It just increases the complexity. 50% is the chance that at least 1% of devices in the organization are affected. So you probably have some in your organization. You just may not be aware of it. 106 is the average number of malware hits businesses every hour. 3 years ago, that number was under 50. So it's more than doubled in 3 years. Companies are getting pounded every hour with attempted breaches and malware attacks. And 90% of organizations say they've been breached, 43% say in the last year. And as the old axiom goes, right, there are two types of companies, ones that have been breached and ones that don't know they've been breached. And so the security table, the stakes have been raised because we do live in a world where everything's connected. And again, I'm not trying to scare you. Understand that all of this technology that we brought in, bring your own device, cloud, all that stuff, it's allowed us to do things with IT that we could never, ever, ever have dreamed of before. You have a remote worker on the other side of the world. You want to give them access as if they were in the office and forward. You can do that today, right? You want to be able to provision data services with the click of a button. You can do that today, right? You want to be able to bring in multiple cloud services and be able to have workers have, a bit of a seamless experience. You can do that today, right? But we've made the environment much more complicated, and I think that's been the big change. Now, when you think about the legacy WAN, it is inhibiting business transformation. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, right, the business today is about speed. In fact, if you think about competitive advantage, right, historically it's been about things like, brand and who has or maybe who has the lowest cost, or who has the best product, or who has the best people. But it's my belief that in the digital era, competitive advantage will no longer be about any of those things. In fact, it will be based on the organization who is the most adaptable to change. So Darwin got it right. He wasn't talking about business at the time. He was talking about, the origin of the species. But in the business world, companies that are the most adaptable to change, that can make the best decision in the shortest amount of time, will wind up becoming the sustainable market leaders. Now, the legacy WAN, as I mentioned, is based on a lot of manual processes that require scripts to be pasted in and patches and things like that. And if you want to have an agile business and you don't have an agile WAN, the WAN is the thing that's holding back the company from evolving. So these are some of the things to think about with your traditional WAN, right? Application rollouts tend to be very slow and limited because of MPLS connections and rigid connections. They can often take a long time. Network complexity make branch upgrades very challenging. So think about a typical branch. You might have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different appliances in there. Sometimes they're from the same vendor, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they require a truck roll or a visit to the branch, sometimes not. In fact, when I was in IT, a big part of my year was spent traveling to remote branches, upgrading servers, upgrading routers, things like that. You try and do it remotely. and you hold your breath and you hope that the router comes back up, because if it doesn't, you're hopping on a plane and getting out there. So sometimes belt and suspenders would make some sense to have somebody out there that was local. The static architectures isn't exactly cloud optimized, right? It's anything but. Often changes can be slow. Bandwidth is used terribly inefficiently. There's something in networking called the trombone effect, and that's if I'm running a cloud service and I'm running it across my WAN, the users do something, that I pipe it back across the same WAN link. So I'm using twice as much bandwidth as I need, because I'm running everything into my core and then back out to the WAN, instead of simply just having the branch connect directly. And then lastly, security is an overlay technology today. And so I wind up deploying my network, and then I wind up thinking the security on top of that, and sometimes the security overlay gets in the way of network performance. In fact, in my security survey last year, 45% of companies admitted, so understand this is the number that admit, the number's probably higher, that they actually turn security features off in favor of performance. So companies are knowingly downgrading their security posture because they're not sure, or because of performance. And again, that's the byproduct of having it be an overlay. And so I think you need to think more about integration. Now at this point, I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to turn it over to Curtis, who's going to walk us through one of our two poll questions. So Curtis.
Thank you so much. And as Zeus said, it is time for the first of two poll questions. Now this first poll question is, what are the top considerations your organization has for adopting or migrating to a new secure WAN? Now your options are reducing recurring OpEx costs, simplifying deployment and management, the ability to reliably use direct internet access to a branch, and support of cloud-based applications. Now please select the answer that best suits your organization by clicking in the radio button to the left of the text, and then don't forget to look down and click on the black Submit button at the bottom. As Zeus said, this is the first of two poll questions we'll be asking today, and then I want to remind everyone that the poll questions are not the end of your interaction with Zeus. We do have that Q&A session coming up at the end. You can submit your questions at any time during the presentation, so go ahead, feel free to get those questions in as they occur to you during the presentation. Well, at this point, I think we're going to go ahead and take a look at what our audience is telling us. And according to them, it's split pretty evenly. We're looking at about 33, one-third, say supporting cloud-based applications is their primary reason. Quarter say simplifying deployment and management. A few fewer say reducing recurring OpEx costs. And a small number down there who want to reach out reliably with direct internet access to branch offices. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating in this poll. Remind you, you've got another one coming up. And with that, Zeus, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Curtis. Now, just to be clear, all those were valid reasons. In fact, if you're going through a WAN deployment, you're probably considering all of those things. But it was interesting to see the growth of cloud applications driving the WAN transformation. And clearly, as I mentioned before, the cloud is now mission critical to companies, and so it makes those responses made a lot of sense to me. Now, I talked about the problem. I talked about how business is changing and we need to transform our WAN. And so what's the solution? And I think the solution is this concept called SD WAN, or Software-Defined WAN. Now, SD WAN comes in many shapes and flavors, right? Comes by, some people call it broadband WAN, things like that. You can go hybrid WAN. At its most basic level, what an SD WAN is, it's a way to be able to control the WAN through software, to be able to make changes in real time, to be able to adapt to business changes. And there's multiple different ways to deploy it, right? Direct internet connection is part of them. You can run part of it over a private IP network or MPLS WAN to run some sort of hybrid mode. You could make the leap and just go entirely all broadband WAN if you wanted to, assuming you have the right technology. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but ultimately, when you think about SD-WAN, it's software-based control and then some mix of connectivity between some type of internet-based broadband, private IP, or MPLS. And how you get there is really dependent on the comfort you have as an organization. If you want to keep some real-time apps running over MPLS, that's fine, and then offload things to the internet. If you want to go all internet WAN, that's fine as well. There's no real right answer to this, and we're actually going to talk about some of the architectures as we go through this. Now, this was from a network survey. I asked, when you think of SD-WAN, or how do you think SD-WAN can help your company? You can see some changes here. So simplify network architecture. And in fact, it's my belief, right, and I've written this if you follow me in my blogs on some of the media sites, complexity is the enemy of both security and the network manager, right? So if you have so consider this, that if you're going through an IT project and the solution is more complicated than the problem, right, that's an issue. And maybe you want to rethink that strategy. And so I think ultimately, when you think of traditional WANs, a lot of manual configuration, a lot of direct connections. The average time it takes to make a change is 4 months, right, which doesn't exactly scream agile. And so SD-WANs can greatly simplify network architecture. It can centralize control. It can orchestrate changes. It can automate things. And so I think that's the biggest one. If you look at the top three, simplifying network architecture, increasing network agility, in some ways they go hand in hand, and then optimizing for cloud traffic. And so some of the other ones below that, it's good to me to see that saving my organization money, it's important, but it shouldn't be the most important reason that you go through this. If all you want to do is save money on your WAN, call up your telco and renegotiate with them. They'll probably come down in price, and you'll do that. There are many other better reasons to do SD-WAN, including simplifying architecture and agility and cloud alignment versus just cost. Now, with that being said, if you think about the business benefits of SD-WAN, lower cost is one of them. You will ultimately I'm not saying save a tremendous amount on transport. You may or may not, but ultimately your OpEx costs will go down. In fact, if you think about total cost of ownership for running a network, people costs are about 40% of that cost. And so if you're able to offload a lot of the manual provisioning and tasks that you go through when running a network, if you can even trim that by, say, 10, 15%, that's going to have a huge impact on what you're spending on operational costs. And so lower costs there's two elements to that. There is the few elements. There's the services side, there's the CapEx side and OpEx, and you really want to focus on OpEx, and SD-WAN can do that. It reduces complexity, so you wind up with a simpler network. Ultimately, under the covers, it may be more complicated, but the software control and the overlay that you get simplifies it. And so think of it like like an iPhone, right? It's an incredibly complicated piece of machinery, but it's easy for the user, and the user in this case with SD-WAN would be the IT manager. And so the SD-WAN masks much of the complexity from the network manager and allows the network manager to think about doing more strategic things. It increases the agility of the network. So if you need to be able to make a change quickly, that doesn't mean having to go touch every router and implement a change and cross your fingers and hope you did it correctly. It means being able to centralize the control, push an update out, orchestrate it with application changes, right? And that ultimately leads to better alignment with the business. So when the business needs to move, and follow Mark Benioff's advice about speed being the new currency of business, the WAN no longer is the thing that holds things up. You can align with business policies and be able to make changes. It's optimized for the cloud, and as we saw in our poll data, that was the number one reason people are looking at the changes. You get better visibility and control. So there's an expression that's used in networking quite a bit. You can't manage and you can't secure what you can't see. Well, SD-WAN is going to let you see more, therefore you can control more and secure better. And ultimately, you will get better, more consistent application performance. I think one of the challenges with networks today in the static configurations is it doesn't really account for any kind of changes or outages and things like that. And so SD-WAN will let you do that. Now, thinking architecturally about SD-WAN, as I mentioned, not all SD-WANs are the same, right? Now, that's the same with anything you buy. No two products are the same. I think security and quality must be integrated in the solution. And when you think about SD-WAN architecture, there are a number of ways to do it. You could have everything on-prem. You could have some sort of hosted management, or you could have hosted management and gateways. And actually, to explain how VeloCloud does that, I'm going to bring Parag in, who's actually going to talk about how architecture matters and the different types of architectures that VeloCloud enables.
Thank you, Zeus. Hey guys, this is Parag. I head the product management team at VeloCloud Networks. Really, some of the interesting things I saw on the poll results, like you pointed out, to reduce the cost, obviously there are three things needed. simplify deployment, use of internet within the branch office, and how do I do it optimally. And then third thing is how do I access the cloud services in the most optimal way. And we believe that a cloud-delivered SD-WAN architecture can give you all of those three so that you can really reduce your cost. Now, as a part of cloud-delivered SD-WAN, you get a branch device, you have an orchestrator, and you have a set of cloud gateways. The branch device calls homes into the orchestrator. So it's a plug-and-play deployment. The branch device gets shipped out to an end customer. They plug in the links, power up the device, and click go. And as soon as that happens, the branch device calls homes into the orchestrator, downloads a bunch of policies. As a part of that policy, based on the business policy that's configured, it gets which are the set of hub devices or which are the set of cloud gateways am I allowed to connect to. Once he connects to the set of cloud gateways and to this hub devices, you can now optimally access both your on-premise and SaaS applications. What we also believe is because the apps are moving to the cloud, how do I get a cloud node? How do I get an SD-WAN node in the cloud to bookend the service and to deliver optimal services? Because really, end of the day, going back even 10 years, 20 years back, what is WAN measured in terms of? It's measured in terms of how available the WAN is and how well the WAN is utilized. Now we need to ensure how available the WAN is and how well it's utilized for both on-premise and cloud apps. And at the same time, the definition of availability is changing. It used to be, oh, what is the 99.99% WAN availability? People don't talk about it that way now. It's more about how are my apps performing on these certain links? Is the latency of the MPLS link or is the jitter loss characteristics met on the MPLS link? Do I have enough bandwidth? Can I support enterprise-grade voice and video applications on even internet links? So those are the kind of questions that SD-WAN helps answer. And obviously there is flexibility in terms of based on how open you are, how much of cloud access you need. There's flexibility in terms of how much of that you should consume. But really, end of the day, build a secure overlay between your branch device to the cloud gateways, another edge devices, build dynamic branch-to-branch tunnel, and use the benefits of this overlay, which means better improvements of your WAN availability and getting the WAN utilized in a much better way. But Zeus, you have a lot of coverage on this area. Like, what do you think on different use cases that you are seeing out there?
Well, I do want to say, actually, it was interesting listening to you because in some ways, the way your orchestrator and the gateways work is it flips networking upside down, right? So think about traditional IP networking, and I want everybody on this webinar to think largely about how the internet works, right? IP is built on a concept that everything connects to everything, and that's why it works so well. But it's not too great with security because everything connects to everything means hackers can attack everything. And I think the model that Parag described changes that, where you allow nothing unless you specifically enable connectivity between 2 points. And so that's quite a stark change, and it actually increases security. The other interesting point that you brought up was around the concept of performance, and we don't measure availability anymore. And frankly, I'm going to say something that may seem a little odd, but it's true in that outages, the traditional network management platform that shows you red light, green lights, doesn't matter anymore. We build network hardware is built so well, and we build our networks with so much redundancy in it that you could actually go turn off a device somewhere, and everything is going to continue to work. And that's why often is the case that users call and complain with problems, but everything on your dashboard's green, right? And it's because performance is much different than fault management. I think for too long, we've relied heavily on this concept of managing faults, and I think that we need to start thinking of moving past that to more about measuring performance. And in fact, one of the interesting data points from my research is that 3/4 of performance problems are actually reported by the end user, not the IT department. So again, IT is great at picking up on faults, but not so great at picking up on performance problems. And I think SD-WAN helps with that because it masks a lot of that complexity and the things that cause faults. Now, the first architecture that we look at is the all on-premise architecture, and this is where, in Parag's case, the controller and the orchestrator would be at the edge of the network. All the infrastructure is on-prem, and this is good for customers that prefer to backhaul all traffic to the data center still. And the typical use cases you would see are things like retail organization, healthcare companies, financial services, tier 1 service providers. And actually, to go through a use case, I'm going to bring Parag back in to talk about one of VeloCloud's customers and how that deployed their SD-WAN with this architecture.
Sure. So as I mentioned, it's all about cloud-delivered SD-WAN. Now, there are a set of components in this cloud aspect that VeloCloud could host, but obviously you can build your own private cloud as well. And that's this example of this large insurance company who preferred to build their own network of cloud service, just like what VeloCloud would build. So it's still a cloud-delivered SD-WAN. It could still be all on-premise, but with a push button, they can start accessing cloud apps in future. Now, really the challenge this company was facing was today they have, and this was, by the way, one of our largest SD-WAN wins with a large insurance company, and they have thousands of sites, insurance agents, working from all these different sites, tens of thousands, I would say. And they had real complexity in managing their security infrastructure because in past they have had to use complex technologies, tie in the VPN with Microsoft CA server, like build everything around just to get PKI up and running. The past example they used was they took an year, and after that they got so tired getting it up and running that they moved back to pre-shared key. And that goes back to one of the things Zeus mentioned at the beginning of the call, that on one of his surveys someone said, people are willing to compromise security to get simplification or to get performance benefits in return. And this is a perfect example where the customer really wanted security. They want to roll out PKI, but it's so complex that they say, okay, now I'll roll out pre-shared keys. The problem with pre-shared key is obviously it was not scalable at the same time. It was easy to deploy, but not scalable. So that's where this insurance company, they went with VeloCloud. We gave them best of both worlds. Now we give them PKI, which is scalable, but we also give them PKI, which is very, very easy to deploy, and with an entire workflow, which is all built in. So you don't need to tie it with your CA infrastructure. Everything is built in. All the key rotations happen automatically. The device certificates are anchored to the CA running inside the VeloCloud orchestrator itself. And really the whole experience for them in terms of simplifying the network, getting it up and running within no time, was one of the reasons which we ended up winning this deal.
All right. Well, thanks for that update. Now I'm going to take a look at another type of architecture, and that would be one of hosted management. So this is where the management is delivered via the cloud, although some of the infrastructure is still on-prem. But you can see here the orchestrator, actually that's VCG, I think, the gateway are in the cloud. The data continues to flow on-premise because the SD-WAN nodes are actually on-prem as well. And then you get, this lets you have much more dynamic branch-to-branch or branch-to-hub, different types of tunnels. And so you think about the type of organization that would use that. This would come from companies that start relying on cloud a little bit more, so insurance companies, hospitality companies with outsourced type of services. UCaaS providers have been an adopter of this. And so, I've explained that a little bit from a high-level perspective, but I'm going to bring Parag in to actually talk about how go through it from a customer perspective.
Absolutely, Zeus. So one of hospitality company that we are working with, very, very well-known brand within North America. One of the things that they came back to us was, hey, we still continue to backhaul all the traffic to regionalized firewall services, and our internet breakout is in a regionalized branch office. But at the same time, we don't want to go through the complexity of installing a controller and orchestrator on-premise. Because in this particular instance, it's a cloud-delivered SD-WAN, they could leverage the controller and orchestrator, which was in the cloud. They don't need to host it themselves, but all the data traffic continues to flow to their regionalized firewall services. Not only that, in past, they have configured thousands of lines of PBR rules to send traffic, and they got so tired, they never had a concept of regionalized firewall. They used to backhaul it all the way to their DC, which was an additional problem because it was backhauling traffic to the data centers. and now the customer wants to pull the firewall from the DC to regionalized branch, but how do I do that in a much more easy way so that I don't have to configure hundreds or thousands of lines of CLIs just to forward the traffic back to those branch offices? So again, one of the concepts that SD-WAN brings in is not only it's simple to deploy and configure, but it has an entire business policy framework. With a single click, you can say, I want to forward XYZ traffic to this particular regionalized firewall, and it's done without any CLI configuration. It's like a few simple clicks. At the same time, as you can assume that this is hospitality, voice was very, very critical to them. And they had zero tolerance for voice going down. It has to always remain up. And one of the pain points there was they did have MPLS, but even on MPLS links, they saw that, these 99.99% SLAs that are guaranteed, sometimes those are not good enough because, as I mentioned, it's how good your voice behaves on that 99% SLA. It's not just about the availability. Availability definition is changing. And this particular case, they added an internet link. And then the key here was, okay, if I'm adding these two links, how can I offer you sub-second blackout or brownout protection? So which means even for an existing voice call, if there was a problem on MPLS link, I can seamlessly move the call to the internet link without any downtime, without any discouraging MOS scores. And in fact, they collect MOS scores on an ongoing basis. We started down the route of having 5 sites because we thought, let's start the SD-WAN deployment, let's show them what the results are. They captured the MOS scores, they saw the before and after, they went back to the CIO, and now it's kind of deployed in 500 sites. So again, a key use case, it's leveraging the simplicity of the cloud, leverage the simplified management and controller in the cloud, and at the same time, really make sure that the real-time applications perform well on all these links.
All right, well, thanks for that. We'll talk about a third, I guess you pushed and I pushed. We'll talk about a third architecture now, and that's hosted management and gateway. And so this is where all the management's cloud delivered. And so in this model, the cloud traffic is directed to the virtual cloud gateway node. Data center traffic flows back into the data center, and so this is where you can see the gateway down at the bottom actually acts as a bridge to the different SaaS applications. And so in this case, your SD-WAN provider would have a relationship with those SaaS apps, and they provide connectivity to that. And so when you think about this model, those cloud apps actually become part of your overall WAN. And so in this case, this would be great for like large enterprises and SPs that need access to cloud apps. It's great for M&A as well. So if you buy another organization and you want to be able to allow them to have access, you just drop an SD-WAN connection in there, and then they have the same access to the same applications. And just following the same pattern, Parag, why don't you come back in and talk about how this retail customer leveraged this model to be able to improve their business.
Absolutely. So with this particular retail customer, they were using a UCaaS vendor, like a UC as a service vendor in the cloud. And, they were trying to access a couple of cloud applications. One, they were also Office 365 customer. They had complexity in integration with cloud web security. And in this particular instance, it was Zscaler. Because in case of Zscaler, as you guys know, to connect to Zscaler, you need to start building tunnels from every single branch office directly to Zscaler. Because they were willing to not backhaul from the branch. They have internet access. I want to go directly to the end application, internet apps or SaaS applications. I want to consume it directly from the branch office. Now, obviously, security is a concern, so that means I want cloud web security vendor like Zscaler to come in and help me with those kind of security deployments. Now, 2 issues with that. One was they were trying to go directly to Zscaler. They had 500 branch offices. Now start building tunnel from every single branch office to the Zscaler instance in cloud, and that was very, very complex to manage. At the same time, they were losing performance benefits because minute you don't go back to your optimization headend which sits in your DC, how do I bookend my solution to these cloud apps? And at the same time, they also had resources in AWS. They had 5 VPC instances, just to give you guys a perspective, and they had 500 branches trying to access these 5 VPC instances, which means it warrants 2,500 tunnels and it was a security nightmare. They lost optimization, and at the same time, they had all these tunnels to configure and manage. Now, and that's the power of SD-WAN solution, and they thought, wait a minute, why am I doing all this? They can connect all these branches, automatically connect to VeloCloud's cloud gateway with a single click, and from VeloCloud's cloud gateway, now they can build a single tunnel to Zscaler or to AWS instances, to pretty much any non-VeloCloud site with a single click can be included as a part of the SD-WAN domain. So that's what the customer did. And the end result was 2,500 tunnels went down. From 2,500, it went down to 5 tunnels to AWS. Not only it was easy to manage, but at the same time, they were getting the performance and visibility benefits of using those cloud gateways. So again, getting simplified deployment, getting their security, and getting high performance access to these cloud apps was the key use case why they started leveraging the cloud gateways.
Thanks, Rag. That was a great case study. At this time, actually, we're going to do our second poll, and I'll bring Curtis back in to run the poll.
Thank you so much. And as you said, it is time for our second poll. Our question in this poll is, which of the following architecture use cases best applies to you? Now, your options are SD-WAN edge device on-premise with management on-premise, an SD-WAN edge on-premise, management in the cloud, and SD-WAN optimization for cloud. And the third is SD-WAN edge on-premise, management in the cloud. Now, please select one of these by clicking the radio button to the left of the text, and then don't forget to click on that nice submit button at the bottom. And we appreciate your participation in this poll and the first poll, and remind you that our big opportunity for participation is coming up in just a few minutes. That's the Q&A session. You can ask your question for the Q&A session at any time during the presentation. Give just another second or two for the answers to come in. And now let's see what our audience has been telling us. The SD-WAN edge device on-premise and management on-premise is the #1 option. Nearly half of our audience has that configuration. A smaller number has put management in the cloud along with SD-WAN optimization for cloud. Just a few folks out there doing the WAN edge on-premise and management in the cloud. Now, thank you so much for participating in both of these polls. We appreciate it and look forward to the Q&A coming up in just a few minutes. Now, to get us there just a little bit faster, Zeus, we'll turn it back over to you to continue the presentation.
Thanks. Actually, Farag, I believe you were going to go through this next slide as well. And I was just curious, did those poll results surprise you? Was this consistent with your customer base?
Yeah, I think it is consistent, although we do see a lot of migration to the cloud service like you pointed out. But what happens is two things, right? One is that 40% that you see, 48% that you see for this all on-premise. Some of these customers reach out to us and tell us, you know what, yes, it is all on-premise today, but we want to be future-proof. We want to be future-ready because we know that a year down, I have a project approved where the apps are moving to the cloud. So I would say with very large Fortune 100 companies, we do see that. But in general, I would say, you know, especially access to IaaS, SaaS is becoming more and more common.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right. So do you want to walk us through the slide? Yeah.
Absolutely. So one thing, you know, on this particular slide is, as you see, again, there are 3 components. I won't go over it. There is an edge device, there is an orchestrator, there is a set of cloud gateways. I remember my first discussion with a service provider talking about SD-WAN. This was like around 2.5 years back. And the question was, hey, does SD-WAN even compete with what we are doing? And, you know, that was the mindset early on in the SD-WAN days. And the answer was absolutely not. You know, you get to keep your revenue. You get to keep what you're doing from a revenue perspective. You keep your MPLS revenue, keep your internet revenue, but you're delivering value-added services. One thing some service providers don't want to lose is saying, hey, now this is completely transport agnostic because you can switch from one transport to another. And the answer is you can deliver cloud-delivered SD-WAN from your own cloud network to make sure that your customer base is happy, right? Because the reason customers are going down the path of SD-WAN is because you're not offering these services. You're still in the old mindset where you are saying, hey, if the WAN is 99% available, you need to move away from that. You need to go back and tell the customer, I'm going to make sure that your voice works, period, right? It doesn't matter. I'm going to ensure that. And trust me, most of the larger customers, when you say that there is a variety of internet links, there are a variety of MPLS circuits coming on worldwide, they don't want to manage it. They want a single point of person to contact to when the network goes bad, because out in California, there might be one internet provider. In East Coast, there is another internet provider. Back in India, there is another internet provider. All these internet providers merge as a part of SD-WAN. Who is going to make sure that all this is functional? When things go wrong, I don't need to keep calling around all these ISPs, right? So that's where the role of SP becomes really critical. I want to ensure that not only over the private links, which is what they have done in past, on hybrid and on internet-only sites, how can I be competitive? How can I offer more services? And in that process, just to give you an example, we had an SP who offered MPLS only, and we took them down this route, and they started offering hybrid services. They came back to us 2 years from now. The result is we have been selling a lot more video endpoints, because guess what? We didn't consider this in past. Yes, you know what? We were always pushing the customer add bandwidth on the MPLS side. Customer was not happy. But now we have more bandwidth to our access, and we've been selling a lot more video endpoints, because you can ensure that video can be delivered reliably even on internet side. Okay, let me sell more video endpoints. And that becomes an easy justification in terms of how do I enable more and more value-added services by offering reliable SD-WAN services. We have had SD-WAN use cases wherein customers say, I want to enable rich services on the branch device itself. So 3 main use cases on the branch. They can use an appliance. They use a virtual form factor running as a virtual CPE on a commodity x86 box. Or they can use, on the appliance itself, they can host with a single click third-party VNFs services running on the branch edge device itself. And firewall is a good example. Hey, customer wants to use firewall of his choice. I don't want to use the firewall that you give. Absolutely. Just insert a firewall of your choice on the edge device, and that means the customer gets what he deserves, what he likes as a service. Now, the benefit to the SP being, they roll these services out remotely. They don't need to do truck rolls. A new firewall needs to be shipped. A new firewall of choice needs to be deployed. With a single click, that gets instantiated. So win-win for both the end customers and for the service providers. At the same time, the key component here tying everything together is the cloud gateway, because this is not deploy a device in the branch, deploy another device in the data center, and SPs know how complex can it get to deploy or insert devices in DCs. It's a long cycle, and we tell them, no, you don't need that. The head end or the DC is already on your MPLS network. We have a multi-tenant cloud gateway that can sit in your core. It sits next to the SP's PE routers today. And this is a very common deployment from a cloud-delivered SD-WAN from a SP perspective, because we sit right there in the core. We optimize the last mile. There is a very reliable mid-mile core, and they can start from few sites, not do a complete WAN rip and replace, and do a WAN expansion. And that's what SPs like. They can deliver rich services, sub-second blackout brownout protection, higher WAN availability, higher WAN utilization. They can charge for all of these things, and they can deploy new services as I described. So again, SPs really need to think, how can I deliver rich services from my own cloud? And they really need a cloud-delivered SD WAN architecture to make that happen.
All right, thanks. I think you were going to talk about the service side use case right now, correct?
Yeah, so I touched on some of the points, but key things that service providers have looked for, they look for a 3-tier role-based multi-tenant architecture wherein they can be the operators, they can have channel partners. Within the channel partners, they could have their end customers. So really they want to, security becomes very important, because multi-tenancy comes with segmentation. Multi-tenancy comes with all the security aspects, bells and whistles that makes it multi-tenant. And they want a single dashboard that can tie into their upper level orchestrators with REST APIs. So which becomes very important, because the SP is like, I'm delivering other services and I have my own portal that I want to expose to end customers. So again, making it role-based, making an orchestrator which is REST API-driven becomes very critical. At the same time, their PE routers, because it sits in their core, very close to the core, their PE routers are already multi-tenant. How can I have with a single click multi-tenant VRF-aware BGP running so that I can not only segment the traffic, but also the automation and all the stuff that comes with it is all segmented. That means they need a multi-tenant head end that sits in their core. And all that is possible with SD-WAN. They want a VNF for flexibility. How can I use, I don't want to deploy a physical edge. I already have an x86 box running. Okay, you have VNFs for your deployment. In the core, they want to move away from physical hardware. They have ASR 9Ks, some old security VIG, they call it secure internet gateways or virtual internet gateways. They are running out of capacity. They were appliances. I want to have software, multi-tenant software running in my core. So all these become like a package cloud-delivered SD-WAN that's available for SPs, at the disposal of SPs. And as they progress, as they mature, they have all these components available to their disposal.
All right, thanks. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, so if you think about doing SD-WAN, some key considerations for SD-WAN. And I think you definitely want to go with a provider that can give you a choice of architecture. As I mentioned, there's no, we walked through 3 different architectures here. There's no right answer as to which one of these is better. And if you look at the preferences in a poll, even, it was fairly well split across the 3. You want to employ some kind of zero-touch provisioning, and so that's not having to go visit the branch, not having to touch the box every time you want to make a change. You want to ensure there's secure connectivity. As I mentioned before, that security integrated into network will greatly simplify trying to secure your connections versus having having to do things the manual way. You want to have an easier rollout using PKI, and I'm going to actually ask Parag a question about that in a bit. You want to choose a provider that's got multi-tenancy capabilities. It simplifies, and while on the surface it may not matter to an enterprise, but it does because it simplifies the service provider architecture, therefore allowing them to offer you better service, and then also protects the customers from things that happen on other customer networks. Think about direct cloud connectivity. Obviously, everyone's using cloud services today, so if the provider has direct cloud connectivity, then to be able to bring it onto your network is fairly simple. You just basically turn it on, and then having the ability to do some sort of service insertion and chaining. And so this is my conclusion. I'll have a couple of follow-up questions for Parag, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Just in summary, I've mentioned all these things before. I'm just summarizing them. The digital world is changing business faster than ever before, and it's changing the pace of change, or changing the pace of innovation, and creating new opportunities. Business and IT leaders must work together to focus on enabling greater agility in the business, which means greater IT agility, which means greater network agility. Software-defined networking is bringing an unmatched level of agility to the network that we've never seen before. When it comes to software-defined networking in the WAN, there's really no right answer. Choose the architecture that's best for you, and then ensure the solution meets your security and performance requirements. And just there's a couple of follow-up questions that I have for Parag before we get into this. Can you just explain the PKI again and then how it helps customer rollouts?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, with one of the insurance companies that we had, it was very, very complex to deploy. I've been, back then I used to be deploying VPN just like users, and you will agree, just to get pre-shared key was complex. We used to say, oh, pre-shared key is simple because we used to compare pre-shared key to PKI, and obviously it was way simpler. But even pre-shared key, it's not like it was super simple. You have to still go through hundreds of lines of CLIs to even configure pre-shared key. It just seemed simpler compared to PKI. Now, what we are discussing here is how do I get an entire PKI rollout? How do I make sure that I don't need to engage third-party CAs just to get the workflow correct? And all that is possible by having device certificates anchored to the CA, which is running inside the orchestrator itself. So you don't need to create or manage a new CA infrastructure. And really the key is how can I make PKI really scalable and secure, which is already default as a security mechanism for PKI. but how do I make it very, very simple to deploy just with a few clicks? So from a PKI architecture perspective, it really matters that you look for an architecture that takes you securely from branch to another branch. It takes you securely from branch to cloud apps. It takes you from branch back to the DC. It doesn't matter where the connectivity or where the endpoint is. I need a scalable, secure, and a very, very simple to use PKI infrastructure. Those should be some of the key things you should be looking for.
All right. Now, really quick, and then we'll get to Q&A. Can you describe how your zero-touch provisioning works and how the service insertion capabilities work?
Oh, absolutely. So these are two questions. I'll take it in two parts. So on the zero-touch piece, there are a couple of different mechanisms we have for zero-touch, and it really depends on whether it's an end customer or whether it's an SP. We have seen both use cases being deployed. The key is a box can be drop-shipped in both cases. You can plug and play. You can connect the power supply. You can connect the actual Ethernet links to the device. And once that is done, the end customer could either click an activation URL, which they can receive through an email. And as soon as they do that, there is a one-time secure password binding that happens. A secure one-time password is generated. And this password is, the password is authorized. The edge is authorized against the orchestrator. And then that expires. It's not like we keep it active. So again, there is an expiry to it, and it is also bound to the serial number itself. So if you have the edge device, you can optionally configure the serial number, so we can do even 2-factor, 3-factor authentications. We have had some SPs who have said that, all this is good, but at the same time, I don't even know who person on site is going to be for the deployment, and which means I can't send them an activation email in advance. So we have a mechanism for zero-touch deployment even for that, wherein the contractor on site can plug it in. It can show up on your dashboard in a list of devices, and the SP can go and approve that as an authorized device as a part of that process. So again, both push and pull activations are important from a workflow perspective, and both can be delivered as a part of the solution. And depending on the use case, you might look for one or the other. The second question you asked was more around the service insertion. And really the key there is services can be inserted in the branch, it can be inserted in the cloud, or it can be inserted on-premise to the DC. But how do I insert services with a few clicks, with a mouse click without doing hundreds of lines of CLI? That would be the key piece. Again, I'll take that offline, and you guys can reach out to us and we can share more details on that.
All right, thanks. And I think we're going to move to Q&A now. And just wanted to pass along my contact info here, but I think we do have quite a few lined up. So.
Very good, and it is time to begin with our Q&A. But before we begin today's Q&A, we'd like to ask everyone to please take just a moment to fill out the feedback form that's just opened on your computer. If your pop-up blockers have prevented the form from launching on your computer, you can click on the red survey icon at the bottom of your screen. Remember, to complete the form, please press the Submit Answer button at the bottom of the page. We thank you in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation in the survey allows us to better serve you. And now on to the Q&A portion of our event. As a reminder, to participate in the Q&A, just type your question into the text box located to the right of the presentation window, or click the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen, and then remember, as with everything else, please click the big Submit button. Well, let's quickly get to our Q&A. The first question that we have is, we've had QoS, Layer 7 App Control, and Dashboard for years. This just ties it up all together. But do we lose something in the process? Does this take away fine-grained control over routing mechanisms and other things that we've come to depend upon?
I can just answer first, and ask Parag to comment from their service. So it doesn't necessarily mean that. I mean, with some services it could, but I think in general, if you use the right service provider, you should have the same level of control that you have. Obviously, if you're doing things at a very, very granular level, and you're doing some custom things in the product, you may not be able to replicate that. But I think in general, you should get the same close to the same level of control. Parag, have you had that be an issue with your customers at all?
Not at all. In fact, it has been better on all of those because one thing that customers look for is an entire ICOM experience, which is installation, configurations, operations, and management, which includes for all of this QoS, L7 aware. You don't want disintegrated dashboards, multiple dashboards doing all these different things for you. You want a single unified dashboard which ties everything together. But not only that, once you tie it together from an application performance perspective, how can I deliver much better experience on my WAN link has been really well received from an SD-WAN perspective.
Very good. We thank you both for those answers. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time. Now, if you did ask a question that was an answer, please expect a personal follow-up within the next handful of business days. We want to make sure that your questions are answered. We've just run out of time to answer them right here. For more information related to today's webinar, please visit any of the resource links available in the green folder icon at the bottom of your screen. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Thank you for attending today's webinar, SD WAN Security Architectures, brought to you by Network Computing and VeloCloud. This webinar is copyright 2016 by UBM. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Network Computing and Simologic, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, Zeus Kerravala and his special guest, Parag Thakur, I'm Curtis Franklin. Thanks for your time. Have a great day.